As this year unfolds, we're watching a new world taking shape, and it's being forged in high temperatures. And in the coming month, May of 2025, the temperature will remain high. This year is a huge one astrologically because it sees 3 of the 4 slowest moving outer planets changing sign. In March, Neptune moved into Aries, marking the beginning of an era in which popular trends and ideals will move towards the bold, the adventurous, the contentious, and the innovative. And towards the end of May, we'll see the second of this year's major shifts. Saturn will follow Neptune into Aries. Aries is the active, pioneering, action-loving sign of Mars, the god of war. Saturn's move into Aries is going to bring a great deal of pressure onto those Aries issues. We'll see new rules and obligations around war, as well as great resistance to it. Aries is about following your authentic urge to act, about being yourself without caring what others think. With Saturn in Aries, we're going to see structures put in place that make that more difficult. But it's also going to feel like being yourself is the most important thing in the world. So get ready for another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. I'm your host, Dan Waits, and let's get into this forecast episode for May of 2025. If you're enjoying this video so far, please do register your support for this channel by clicking the like button. And do subscribe if you want to make sure to catch future episodes. Thanks. April was a big month in so many ways. On the 21st of that month, Pope Francis died. And the very same day, friend of the show Klaus Schwab stepped down as World Economic Forum chief. Was there anything special going on in the sky that day? Well, the sun, signifier of central figures, was caught in a nasty T-square configuration with Mars, the god of war, and Pluto, the lord of the underworld. Not a good day for figures of outstanding visibility. Schwab's interim replacement has already been announced. It'll be former Nestlé chief Peter Brabeck-Letmather, who is infamous for having said in 2013 that water is not a human right, but a market commodity. Yep, let's just put a price on everything. Is it just me, or are they making it a bit too easy to spot the bad guys these days? Now, in the bonus section of last month's forecast episode, available for members of World Astrology Report, I predicted another attempt on Trump's life to emerge around the time of the full moon in Libra of April the 13th. So what kind of event are we looking at in April? Well, we know the theme will have something to do with assassination and President Trump. There have been several attempts at that. And so, unfortunately, one of the possibilities that we have to reckon with here is another attempt on his life. And this came to pass with not one, but 2 assassination plots revealed as this moon was shining in the night sky. A Pennsylvania man was arrested after making threats online to assassinate President Trump and Elon Musk. The man, whose name is Sean Monper, had reportedly been stockpiling weapons too. And it also emerged that a teenager in Wisconsin had killed his own parents as part of a plot to assassinate Trump. According to an FBI affidavit, a 17-year-old boy murdered his mother and father as part of a scheme to get access to funds needed to kill the president. If you want to know how I made that prediction, I explain the technique I used in the bonus sections of my March and April forecast videos on worldastrologyreport.com. Now, there was a fiery feel to April, as expected. Aries is one of 2 signs traditionally ruled by Mars, the war planet, and activations of this sign can bring contention and even war to the forefront. Now, Neptune, the planet of the collective mood and ideals, has just moved into Aries. And on March the 29th, we saw a solar eclipse in Aries to boot. I've already talked about how this eclipse signified European and German rearmament, but I think it also signified the beginning of the trade war sparked by the Trump tariffs. The Trump administration announced it was levying heavy tariffs on imports from countries across the world, both friend and foe alike. In particular, the US is putting 145% tariffs on Chinese exports to the US, and the Chinese have responded in kind with 125% tariffs on US exports to China. Aries is an active, outwardly focused sign. And unlike many of the major changes we see in the world, these developments were the direct result of President Trump's active decisions. He's apparently been a proponent of tariffs for a very long time, since at least the 80s, and he's finally putting his plans into action. Here's what I said about the Aries eclipse in the March forecast. I think it's fair to say that this describes what came in April pretty well. The eclipse is in a semi-square, that's a 45-degree aspect, with Uranus, planet of surprises and revelation and rapid turnarounds. And it's at the midpoint of Jupiter and Pluto, which brings a sense of big and bold transformation, potentially having to do with finance and big money. The word war, as in trade war, was all over the headlines in April. The Chinese, perhaps rightly, see this as an attempt to destroy the Chinese economy, which currently relies heavily on exports, and China has responded in kind to Trump's tariffs. This is a conflict being waged at the economic, the diplomatic, and the policy levels, and given that this is the age of air, in memes as well. Chinese internet users have been making AI animations showing overweight Americans working in factories to assemble products in ways similar to what Chinese workers do now. The new Cold War, the new bifurcation of the planet advances. We can see the Aries-Libra dynamic in play here. The US is essentially moving itself out of the global trade system, or at the very least, it's trying to completely re-engineer it in its own favor. We're seeing self-interest, Aries, that's opposed to the consensus on how the international system currently works, Libra. The echoes of the Civil War period here are interesting because astrologically the Civil War began just as Neptune moved into Aries in 1861, when southern states started to secede from the Union. Now, the US itself seems to be seceding from the international union represented by the international system. And as I've said before, this is also the age of air, the era in which crucial conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn are taking place in air signs. So I think what we're looking at is the emergence of a multipolar world, something that was happening anyway, but Trump seems to be functioning as an accelerant of that process. I see Trump as a kind of agent of chaos and transformation. He may not get what he thinks he's going to get, but he's somehow necessary to create the conditions needed for a new world to emerge. I'd even go as far as to say that his life was spared in the assassination attempt last year so that he could play this role. Many of those who are most upset about Trump are also the same people who've been saying that the system needs to change. Well, the system is changing. Last month, we also saw an important development that wasn't so prominent in most mainstream news reporting. On April the 16th, World Health Organization member states finally completed a draft of the world's first pandemic treaty. The treaty will be considered by the World Health Assembly in May before potentially becoming officially adopted. I suspect that this treaty is an integral part of the machinery needed to create a global system of governance, probably by 2030. We're watching astrological cycles unfold like clockwork here. In November 2020, as the COVID pandemic raged and Jupiter and Saturn were closing in on a conjunction, WHO members proposed drawing up a plan for how they'd approach future pandemics. And this was, of course, also the year that Klaus Schwab announced his Great Reset. The Jupiter-Saturn cycle governs lawmaking, among other things, and now at the last of 3 squares between Jupiter and Saturn, it seems that an agreement is being put in place, but it's in place without the US, which is withdrawing from the WHO. At the same time, the US government now has a statement on its website saying that gain-of-function research was responsible for the pandemic and that the lab leak theory is correct, something a variety of US agencies, including the CIA, now think is likely what happened. Curiously, even though the pandemic treaty is explicitly supposed to be about quote-unquote preventing future pandemics, there's no mention at all of gain-of-function research in it. If the treaty was really aimed at preventing future pandemics, shouldn't it place restrictions on the kind of research that led to the pandemic itself? But what do I know? I'm not an expert. And one last thing, we're seeing more signs that we're currently moving into a very weird new reality at the moment, just as Neptune has entered Aries. On April the 14th, the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology, Michael Kratsios, gave a speech on what he called the golden age of American innovation. And he said this:
"Our technologies permit us to manipulate time and space."
Excuse me, just what was Kratsios referring to here? Was he admitting that the US secretly has anti-gravity technology, or technology that permits faster than light travel? What else could this mean? I think the next couple of years are likely to see the emergence of mind-blowing technologies that have been kept secret for a long time. If you want to know more about why I'm saying that, I suggest you watch this video on 0 Point Energy. Around the same time last month, scientists at Cambridge University in the UK said they'd analysed data from the James Webb Space Telescope and obtained data suggesting the presence of chemicals that are only produced on Earth by marine phytoplankton and bacteria. And so they are wondering if they've detected life on another planet. This looks to me like another step in the slow drip journey towards UFO disclosure. But that slow drip is going to get a lot faster in the next couple of years. Watch this video to find out why. Now, there was a huge shift at the end of March that I haven't addressed much so far, and that's Neptune's move into Aries, a sign it hasn't been in since 1875. Neptune is the planet that shapes cultural trends and ideals. And we've already had about a month of its presence in Aries to get an idea of where culture might be going between now and 2039. And in the bonus section of this video, available for members of World Astrology Report, we're going to dive, unintended, into Neptune's transit through Aries. Members also get access to ad-free versions of all my videos and all their bonus sections, where I go deeper or into less algorithm-friendly topics. And they get access to my monthly long-form live streams on big, sprawling topics like the Age of Aquarius, the Kali Yuga, UFOs, my 2025 forecast, and hot degrees. Oh, and I have one more announcement for you before we get into the forecasting part of this video. My friend Aswin Subramanian is launching a one-year course in Jyotish, also known as Vedic astrology. Aswin is a brilliant astrologer with a family lineage of astrological practice dating back 300 years in India. His course will be taught in English and aimed at spiritual seekers of all kinds, astrology students who want to go deeper in their practice, and Western astrologers who want to learn the Vedic system. I'm going to be taking the course myself because I want to learn Vedic astrology too, and I know Aswin really knows his stuff. I'll put a link to Aswin's website in the description below. Please do take a look if you're interested in learning Vedic astrology, and I hope to see you in class. Thanks for listening, and now back to the video. On May the 4th, Pluto will station retrograde in the 4th degree of Aquarius. The influence of any planet that makes a station, whether it's retrograde or direct, will tend to be felt more strongly in the days before and after the exact station. Part of the reason for this is that the planet will be heavily affecting any chart placements that it's aspecting. It'll really be drilling its influence into those points, and we tend to see this playing out in the news as well. But if you have placements within the first 5 degrees or so of the fixed signs, you'll probably feel this retrograde strongly. Pluto is the planet of empowerment through deep transformation. It signifies journeys to the underworld, death rebirth processes from which we emerge profoundly changed. It's a heavy energy. It can feel like life and death. It tends to deconstruct before it rebuilds us anew. But through that process, we emerge with a better understanding of our true nature. Aquarius is the sign of new visions for societal structure. It's a sign of outsiders, geniuses, visionaries, and scientists. Pluto in Aquarius signifies the empowerment of the Aquarian. Witness the recent takeover of the US government by tech billionaires. Through this process of empowerment, we'll also experience a deep revelation of what Aquarius really means. And as we've seen many times on this channel, previous transits of Pluto in Aquarius have signified important episodes in world history in which societies were significantly transformed in line with certain ideals. Think of the Protestant Reformation and the French and American revolutions. Whenever Pluto stations in Aquarius, we're likely to see events that highlight and deepen Pluto's transformational work in the Aquarian realm. Pluto is currently in the first Egyptian bound of Aquarius, which is ruled by Mercury. The Egyptian bounds or terms are traditional divisions of each sign into 5 unequal regions, ruled by one of the 5 traditional planets, except for the Sun and Moon. It was said that a planet in its own bound was as powerful as a planet in its own sign. The first Egyptian bound of Aquarius, which spans the first 7 degrees of the sign, belongs to Mercury, the planet of trade, communication, and intelligence. As I explained in this video, the story of the French Revolution began with the bankrupting of the French state, which came to a head with Pluto in the Mercury bound of Aquarius. And if you think about the current moment, well, it's the areas of trade and finance and money that are changing the most profoundly right now. But also consider the emergence of artificial intelligence, which might also come under the purview of Mercury, the planet of cleverness. This is the third retrograde station of Pluto in Aquarius so far. The first came on May the 1st of 2023, and on that very day, First Republic Bank failed and its assets were seized. It became the second largest bank failure in US history. This banking crisis had begun in early 2023, just before Pluto entered Aquarius for the first time. To prevent a banking meltdown, central banks across the world had to inject huge amounts of liquidity into the system. I'll be paying close attention to the events at this coming retrograde station for clues about what Pluto is really up to in Aquarius. We might expect more market turmoil and financial transformation. Pluto in Aquarius will also be important in the story of China's rise. Aquarius is the first house of the chart for China, and while I have some questions about the exact time for this chart, at least one version has China being born on October the 1st of 1949 at 3:15 p.m., giving it a moon at 3 degrees of Aquarius and an ascendant at 5 Aquarius. And so Pluto will be stationing retrograde right on the moon of China and close to the ascendant. At the last Pluto retrograde station, China launched its Chang'e 6 mission to collect samples from the far side of the moon. These kinds of missions are symbolic of China's rise as a great economic and technological power. This could be a time when China asserts itself once again. It may also be a difficult moment for the people of China or its material conditions somehow. I also think this Pluto retrograde will be important for Israel. The moon of Israel's chart is at 4 Leo, very close to the exact opposition of this retrograde station point. At the last Pluto retrograde in early May 2024, Turkey suspended all trade with Israel. The simmering conflict between Turkey and Israel is something to pay close attention to in the coming years. We may see more conflict involving Israel or challenges to its position around this time. And here's a bit of a curveball. We might also expect dramatic events in Brazil, and I'll show you why. As we've seen, Pluto's last retrograde station in Aquarius came on May the 2nd, 2024 at 2 degrees and 6 minutes of that sign. And what happened around that time? Well, from April the 29th through to early May, there were torrential rain and storms in Uruguay and Brazil's southernmost state of Rio Grande do Sul. This was Brazil's worst flooding in over 80 years, and more than 180 people died. One of the techniques we can use to geolocate astrological events is the geodetic map. We can convert any planet's zodiacal position to a longitude on the world map using this technique, which defines 0 degrees of Aries as 0 degrees of longitude. And if we convert Pluto's position to its geodetic equivalent, we get this line, which passes through, you guessed it, Rio Grande do Sul and Uruguay, almost exactly where the floods happened. Oh, and why floods, you say? Well, Aquarius is the water pourer. Sometimes astrology is shockingly literal. Now, on May the 12th, we'll see a full moon in the sign of Scorpio. Full moons mark moments of culmination and revelation, and this time they'll be coming in Mars's penetrating, strategic and loyal sign of Scorpio. Expect news around scorpionic themes, security, research, the underworld, waste, and death. This full moon doesn't strike me as too dramatic, although it may bring some surprises given that its most closely aspecting planet besides the Sun is Uranus. There's not much to report around the middle of the month until a week later when Gemini season begins. On May the 20th, the Sun will enter the sign of the Twins, marking the beginning of Gemini season. Gemini is an air sign ruled by Mercury, planet of communication, trade, interpretation, and cleverness. When the Sun is in Gemini in the Northern Hemisphere, we're in a part of the year in which light is dominant over darkness, and the days are growing longer still, and the nights short. When the Sun passes into Cancer at the summer solstice, we'll reach a turning point. At this moment, darkness begins to take territory back from light. And so there's a sense that Gemini wants to enjoy its time in the Sun as much as possible, knowing that the good times won't roll forever. It's a sign of boundless curiosity, the desire to live 100 lives. If Sagittarius cares about truth, Gemini cares about knowledge, and Gemini believes it's best not to take life entirely seriously, and I agree. Of course, Gemini is the sign of the twins, and in many of the world's myths that have to do with twins or brothers, one of them must die. The Greeks had Castor and Pollux, the Romans had Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome, the Egyptians had Osiris, god of the dead, and Set, god of chaos. Set murders Osiris. And then there's the biblical Cain and Abel. Cain, the farmer, becomes jealous of the shepherd Abel and takes his life. Why all the deaths in these myths? Well, when the sun leaves Gemini at the solstice, the spring season ends. It dies. And even though summer is to come, summer is actually the season in which the light declines every day. And so before that end comes, Gemini tries to taste all the fruits on offer in this reality. But Gemini's fatal flaw is its desire to know too much, to try to do everything at once. If Gemini is to flourish, it must at some point narrow down possibility and focus on something. One twin must kill the other. The author Salman Rushdie, he of Midnight's Children and the Satanic Verses fame, has both his sun and moon in Gemini. Here's a quote from him. Go for broke. Always try and do too much. Dispense with safety nets. Take a deep breath before you begin talking. Aim for the stars. Keep grinning. Be bloody-minded. Argue with the world. And never forget that writing is as close as we get to keeping a hold on the 1001 things. Childhood, certainties, cities, doubts, dreams, instants, phrases, parents, loves that go on slipping like sand through our fingers. Hello, Gemini. And so I wish you a fun Gemini season, a time to indulge your curiosity, learn something new, and approach life with a lighter touch. Now, Gemini becomes a really productive place at the end of the month. Whatever whole sign house Gemini represents will benefit for you. On May the 26th, Mercury, the ruler of Gemini, will enter that sign, which it'll whiz through until June the 8th, when it enters Cancer. When Mercury is in Gemini, we can expect our mental capacities to be firing on all cylinders. This period will be excellent for all kinds of mercurial work, study, communication, trading, passing and organizing information. Perhaps the best time of all will be around the end of the month, around May the 30th, when Mercury will reach its cazimi, when it's purified by the fire of the sun. Planet in the heart of the sun is said to be empowered. A Mercury cazimi in Mercury's own sign of Gemini promises moments of great clarity and excellence in the mental realm. These tend to be moments of realization, when problems we've been working over in our minds suddenly surrender and reveal themselves. I also really like the new moon at 6 Gemini taking place on May the 27th. Gemini's ruler, Mercury, is giving a lot of help to the sun and the moon here. An expansive, lucky Jupiter is taking its last steps in the sign. This looks like an excellent time to plant seeds of intention regarding new endeavors related to communication, learning and education, and short-distance travel or trade. But before we go, there's one last shift we have to talk about in this episode, and it's the biggest of the month. On May the 25th, Saturn, the heavyweight of the traditional zodiacal pantheon, will enter the sign of Aries. Saturn spends an average of 2.5 years in each sign, so it's a pretty big deal when it changes sign. It's been in Pisces continually since March of 2023, and its move out of that sign marks the beginning of the end of the Saturn in Pisces era. Saturn will return to Pisces for one last stint, though, from September the 1st to February the 14th, 2026. In traditional astrology, Saturn was the slowest of the planets and the closest to the divine realm of the stars. It patrolled the limits of the known cosmos. The word limits is really powerful if you're trying to understand Saturn, because Saturn shows us the limits of the domain it's working on, the highs and the lows. It can deny us things completely, or give us so much of something that it feels like a burden, or that we're weighed down by the pressure of it. Heaviness is a very typical Saturnine feeling. It makes certain issues, certain parts of life seem particularly important and pregnant with significance and weight. Over the past 2 years, Saturn has been in Pisces, the sign of universal flow. It's a kind of mystical realm in which there are no boundaries. And in that time, we've seen a lot of restrictions to the flow of people, goods, and services. The theme of migration has become a really hot topic. We've seen new laws and measures designed to restrict it. We've seen big disruptions to global trade, particularly in the Gulf region, where the Houthis of Yemen have been attacking shipping. Again, think limits to flow. And the Trump tariffs are a textbook example of this in action. We've seen new rules that'll put limits on global trade. Again, think of how important these matters of trade and migration have become in the world recently. That's the heaviness of Saturn weighing in on Piscean matters of flow and boundarylessness. For many people, the question of faith has also become extremely important. Many of us have been on quests of spiritual discovery with Saturn in Pisces, learning about the hidden structures, the unspoken rules and forces that order reality. I saw a news story recently saying that a lot of young people have been converting to Catholicism recently. Think of this as a search for rules and structure, Saturn, in spirituality, Pisces. But Saturn is now moving into Aries, and so we're going to see fresh trends related to Aries themes, like pioneering, adventure, self-discovery, identity, self-expression, and war. Saturn is going to both block those things, but also make them seem extremely important, as if the whole weight of the world is dependent on them. But what could that look like? Well, I think we can expect that the theme of identity is going to become really important. We're already seeing upswells in sentiment around national identity. Expect much more emphasis and pressure on that theme in the coming 3 years or so. And with Saturn in Aries, we might see new measures and structures related to the theme of identity. Think digital ID schemes, which a lot of countries are looking to introduce right now. In the US, the federal government is about to implement an old Bush-era ID scheme called Real ID just before Saturn enters Aries. Of course, Aries is the sign of Mars, the planet we associate with war. And unfortunately, I think Saturn in Aries is going to bring that theme to the fore. We might see measures like conscription and new laws and rules relating to war in some parts of the world. But I also think we're entering a time of spiritual war. Saturn in Aries is going to force you to reckon with questions like, who am I? What do I want to do in the world? And what do I stand for? We may also see new restrictions on self-expression coming into the world. Aries is about following your authentic urges, about being yourself without caring what others think. With Saturn in Aries, we're going to see structures put in place that make that more difficult. But again, Saturn shows us the upper and lower limits of things. We may see pushes towards war, but also denial and opposition to it. Saturn was in Aries from 1967 to 1969, a time when the US was fighting the Vietnam War. War was on a lot of people's minds, and there were a lot of protests against the war in Vietnam then. The draft, which gave men an obligation, Saturn, to fight, Aries, was also on people's minds. On October the 16th of 1967, with Saturn in Aries, 1,400 young men in 30 cities around the US burned their draft cards. And so with Saturn returning to Aries, expect more protests against war and strong feelings both for and against conflict. Saturn in Aries won't be especially easy. Many of us may feel like we're being forced to prove ourselves or assert ourselves or prevented from doing those things. But Saturn is the greatest teacher of the planetary pantheon, in my opinion, and that's because of the high stakes it attaches to its lessons, the seriousness with which it takes its work, and the unrelenting intensity and persistence of its approach. Just as we've all learned lessons about boundaries, or the lack of them, with Saturn in Pisces, we're going to learn a lot more about what it takes to be truly yourself with Saturn in Aries. That's it for this month's forecast episode. In the bonus section of this video, available for members of World Astrology Report, we're going to do a deep dive into Neptune in Aries, or at least what we've seen of it so far. We've seen about a month of Neptune in Aries by now, but this transit will be with us until 2039. So it's worth taking some time to look at what we've seen in the past few weeks and to pick up on signposts to the future. Where's popular culture going? Well, Neptune in Aries will tell us, and we explore that in the members video bonus section. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.